Welcome back to a new season of Be a Better Leader. I'm Jeffery Downs, Managing Director at FranklinCovey, the world's most trusted leadership company. Every leader who has dealt with a change initiative, no matter the source, needs to communicate that initiative to their team. Leaders need to ensure understanding, buy-in, and commitment if they want their project to be successful. But how can we as leaders do this effectively? Joining us today is Marché, Pleshette, a FranklinCovey senior consultant and co-author of Change: How to Turn Uncertainty into Opportunity. Marché, it's great to have you back on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's great to be back.
You bet. This is such a great and interesting topic to be discussing. And you joined us at the end of our last season to talk about communicating in times of change. But we wanted to have you back today to dive just a little bit deeper. So let's start with this. Why is effective communication so crucial during periods of change?
Communication is everything as it relates to change. Because oftentimes leaders have this vision, this goal, this new strategic initiative, whatever it happens to be. And we expect our team members to, first of all, it can't get done outside of team members. We need them to make it happen. And a lot of times they're just given this directive. And I like to use the word, we convey to them, there's this change, but we don't really communicate. And communication is iterative. It's two-way. And without it, people don't understand what they need to do. They don't understand what this change means for them. So in order for them to get through the process of change, they need it from communication from the very start all the way till the end.
Yeah. One of my favorite sayings that comes to mind is the problem with communication is the illusion that it exists, right? I mean, that we thought we've communicated something. Now, something you said really intrigued me, and that was it's an iterative process, which in my mind means that there's going to be some back and forth until you get to the actual message. Am I right in kind of thinking that?
Yeah, well, not so much until we get to the message, but it's like typically leaders have this message that they want or this goal that they want team members and contributors to help accomplish. And it does, you are right in that it does need to be back and forth communications, this exchange of questions. I'm curious, like when change happens, people have questions, right? So we need to be, as leaders, we need to be able to allow the questions and have some answers and not judge those answers even, right? Or judge the questions. So yes, it is this back and forth experience until we get the clarity that's needed to move forward.
Yeah. And in change, that's significant because that clarity helps to avoid some of maybe the problems that come with change, which leads me to a little bit, related, but going down the path of, in the work that you've done, in the book you've written with change, you've identified 5 common reactions to change. So let's talk a little bit about those, and we'll talk a little bit about should a leader communicate change depending on the reactions they're seeing from their team. So first, let's go through the 5 common reactions, and then we'll get to that second question.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so there's move. There are people who they're ready to roll with change. A lot of times we think that change is something that everybody resists and nobody really wants to indulge. But there are people who they're. I'm hearing the word excited a lot more than I ever have as it relates to change. So there are people who are, yes, I always ask the question whenever I do classes, change is, and I ask people to finish that statement. And I'm getting the word excited kind of as a trend, a little bit more. I didn't always see that. But so there are people who move, they're ready to roll with the change. Some people get tired of the same experience. Then there are those who minimize, and those persons will change as much as is necessary, but as little as possible. Like they don't really want the change so much, but they do what they got to do to get with the program.
Yeah.
And then there are those who wait. And those persons kind of, and I can relate to this because that used to be my default, historically, that used to be my default response to change. Wait and see how others are experiencing this. How are they, like, how's it working for them? Is this going to be hard? Is this going to be easy? And I'll get some tips. Like, they're observing and they are thinking about things. They have questions that they are gathering as they're watching other people do it.
Hmm.
And then there are those who resist change. They don't like it. They have reasons. They have in their minds they have good reasons why this is not going to work. And so sometimes very covertly they will share with people, this is so not a good idea. We've tried this before. It did not work with the last leader. They thought that. So people, there are those who resist. And sometimes they do it covertly, but sometimes they go straight to the source and they say, this is not a good idea. And here's why, hands up, like I don't push back. I don't want to do this, or we shouldn't do this. And
Yeah.
then there are those who quit. And
Hmm.
there are some people who think to themselves when change is initiated and their leaders come to them with this new idea of how things will go, they feel like this isn't what I signed up for. And
Yeah.
they opt out. And
Hmm.
then there are those who stick around but they quit. So we might call them quiet quitters, or But of the five common reactions that I've just shared with you,
Uh-huh.
truthfully, none of them alone is innately bad or good. Right? They
Yeah.
all have advantages and disadvantages to them.
Yeah. You anticipated my next question as far as is there bad to each one of them? Is there good to each one of them? And I could see, the excited person may move too quick,
Yeah,
whereas the one on the other side, the one who wants to quit, is quitting before they really get the opportunity to see what the change is. I
yeah,
mean, there's all of that, but then there's also the patience that you sometimes need for the change,
yeah.
and therefore the excited person needs to slow down a little bit, and the
Yes,
person who is on the side of more toward let me wait and see
yeah,
is actually okay, but sometimes they need to speed up. So it's
yes.
across the board. Am I right in seeing it in that way?
You're absolutely right in seeing it. And I will even give you this. You asked, the first question that you asked was about communication. Well, the
Yeah.
person who resists, just hearing that as a leader might sound like we don't need people to do that. Like we've got to get with the program. But the truth of the matter is, sometimes people who resist have really valid reasons why they think this is not a good idea. And
Yeah.
listening to them, communicating with them, really helps us to understand like what we could do a little bit differently, or
Mm.
maybe obstacles that we could move. But if we just blow them off and say they're resisting, this is bad, we don't need people on our team like this, that's not helpful. We could actually leverage the insight of someone who might resist
Hmm.
embracing the change.
So a leader then has really a responsibility to be looking at and watching for how the individuals on their team may be responding to this particular change, and I guess adapting to what it is that they're, and being able to help them through that. Is that right?
Yeah. So for each of them, it really is one, understanding, as we've kind of tapped on, the advantages and disadvantages of each of those.
Yeah.
And then when we understand that, we could have better conversations with those persons and find and even tap into them for the best, and even coach them beyond the challenges, right? And so, yes, if I understand that this person is really excited and they're ready to roll, they're moving, they could move too fast, but we can leverage that and use that person to help the others who might be lagging a little bit. They're minimizing, right? They're not So if I could get them to slow down and get other people to go with them and not go so fast, but I see that there's something that could be really helpful. So I can understand how I can match that person or their ideas with this person. But it really is, it's interesting. One of the things I've learned and I've appreciated about just this change journey is that we don't have to be psychologists, but this whole business of change really is about people. And we can't do it without people. So it doesn't matter if it's a merger, acquisition, new business initiative, a new leader, a new team member, it doesn't matter. We've got to really have the conversations with people. We've got to understand that
Hmm.
change is a human phenomenon. People feel very different about change. They respond, they react to change very differently. And so we've got to have conversations. We've got to develop some trust with them. We've got to
Yeah.
build their confidence, because if we could get them to do it, then their win is our win as
Yeah.
leaders.
Yeah.
So yeah, communication, it really is the business of relationships.
Yeah.
Really change.
Marche, we were talking in the first part of this about communication and about how critical and important it is. The question that I have, I want to revisit that after we've gone through what are some of the reactions to change and what leaders need to do in order to adapt to that or respond to it in a positive way that gets people to, as you said, have a win so that it's a win-win scenario. The question that I have is how, how can I ensure that the communication is two-way as a leader? What are some of maybe the more tactical things that I can do in order to ensure that that communication is two-way?
Yeah. So one thing is, it's going to be important for us to think about how we're going to communicate change before we just blurt it out. So that's one thing.
I just can't say it.
We can't just throw a change at anybody, right?
Okay.
So we need to think about that. And then when we communicate the change in whatever environment that we do that, whether it's a team meeting or it's an email that starts the conversation about what's happening, we've got to avail ourselves for the questions that I mentioned before.
Hmm.
So a lot of times we will communicate, or as I said before, simply convey change one way, give instructions and move on. And
Yeah.
that's a big miss. So one is just like, when you initially communicate change, make sure that you give people the opportunity to ask questions. And we, as leaders, should have already thought about what are some of the questions that they might ask.
Hmm.
What are we moving from and what are we moving to? How is this going? What really is, because people want to know what's changing, why is this changing, and what does that mean for me? And we've got to be there for that, to
Hmm.
communicate and answer those questions and the questions that come as a result of even communicating that. The other thing is, it's a good idea to just have communication forums where we give people the opportunity to just ask, because particularly if we are leaders of teams and not just one or two persons, right? Because they're talking to each other, even if they're not talking to us. So create forums where they really can be just fluid with asking. And then it's a really good idea to one on one touch base with the persons who you directly work with and find out what is their reaction. That's really why we even talk about those common change reactions. As you asked before, it's like, do we respond to different ones different ways? Yes, we do. So talk to each one to find out, how are you feeling? Like,
Hmm.
what's the one thing that you are most concerned about?
Hmm.
What's the one thing that you think you could do to help us move forward? How
Hmm.
can I be helpful? So you have those one-on-one conversations, really important. And something else is, you asked like in the initial conversations, the
Hmm.
forums that I've just mentioned, the
Hmm.
one-on-ones that we have. But I also want to mention the time or frequency in which we communicate. It can't just be at the beginning. It needs to be throughout change,
Hmm.
because we're inviting people to participate and make it happen. And so if we abandon them, we're not going to be as successful. And that reflects on us as leaders,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
So,
You bring up interesting. I was doing some work with a hospital, and the nurses were working on patient experience and how to have a better patient experience. And this is going to relate to something you were saying. And one of the things that they found had the most impact on patient experience was in a one-to-one conversation when the patient expressed that there was some concern they had, the nurse responding with not only, oh, what is it that you're concerned about, but then also saying, I have time. It
Mm,
like made all the difference in the world. And I think about what you were saying in regards to a leader, and that leader in a one-on-one conversation being able to make the time and to say, I have time.
that's
It
right.
just takes down some of those barriers where I believe that now that individual can truly express themselves, because in a large group forum you can only express yourself so much. I mean, there's going to be some social construct that doesn't allow you to really express yourself, but when you get down to that one-to-one scenario, then and the leader indicates that they have time to hear what it is you're saying, that really, I believe, from what you're saying, helps with the whole change.
Yes, yes, and yes. A couple of things that you've just made me think of. You heard me say earlier, trust is a big part, or a big partner. It's a big, um, it's a big part of change. Trust is, and I have time helps build the confidence of people that, all right, I'm not in this by myself, and my boss, my leader, really does care about how I get through this. And it's not just the logistical things that they are concerned with, while that is the main thing. And for whatever reason, we have changed initiatives, it's almost always for a better, for the good of revenue or, um, you know, customer engagement or whatever it happens to be.
Hmm.
Um, they need to know that they matter in that
Yeah,
process. And
yeah.
the second thing is, I don't know if you know this, but I have a healthcare background. I was manager
Do
of
you
employee.
really?
Yeah, I was manager of employee retention at a major health system. So I know exactly what you have just spoken of. And it's true. And it actually crosses industries. I have
Yeah.
time letting people know that you care enough to just be there and listen builds trust, it builds confidence, and it really helps people to be able to move forward in a powerful way.
Marché, your insights are invaluable, and I could keep talking about this all day
So
because
could
there's so
I.
many wonderful things. I know it's so great and so many stories we could tell.
Yeah.
Just before we finish up, you've identified a couple of pitfalls that maybe a leader can fall into in regards to communicating this, maybe going too fast, not being able to. Is there anything else that you would just say, hey, be careful of this particular pitfall or this particular thing as you communicate change?
Yeah, I appreciate that you're asking that because I've been asking the question a lot to individual contributors and leaders alike about what's the one thing you appreciate most about your leader who introduces a change, and what is one of the what are some of the things that have been the most challenging to you? And the one thing that I keep getting over and over, and this is a two-part answer to that one question, the one thing that they do not like, and that I've heard numerous times, is they feel like the leader doesn't really understand change themselves to the point that they could, enough to really communicate it in a way that they understand what's happening. Right. Sometimes
Mhm.
we can't tell everything as leaders, right? But
Right.
sometimes I've had people say a lot, they're not communicating it very well. So communication, communication, communication. We started that. I will end with that. Second thing that I hear people say that they really appreciate most is the empathy that leaders have with understanding that this is not easy. We're going to work through it, but it's not necessarily just change. Let's do it. That so when they have a leader who understands it's a process, I get it, and I'm with you in it. That's what they love most.
That's great. Well, Marche, absolute wonderful wisdom. I would love to be in any one of your classes, workshops, or seminars. They'd be fantastic. For our listeners who are interested in learning more on this topic, you can download our free guide, How to Communicate Change, a tool for leaders. You'll find a link to it in the show notes, or visit FranklinCovey.com for more information and resources. Well, until we talk again, Marche, thank you for being with us. Listeners, thank you for listening in, and may your journey be wonderful as you strive diligently to become a better leader.